that are absorbing all of the available tax base of small towns just to meet the requirements of a Washington bureaucracy. Our number one requirement for our new Environmental Solutions Agency would be that you would have to have common sense. And we would not hire you to work there unless you have some acquaintance with the real world. Those of you who are aware of the dust proposals that Senator Grassley fought will have an example of what I'm talking about. When you start having guys in Washington write rules on whether or not you create dust while plowing for corn, and who are afraid that your dust is going to go to the field next door, you understand that they're just totally out of touch with reality. We also propose to replace the Food and Drug Administration with a 21st century model in which you want the FDA to be in the laboratory, understanding science, and accelerating to get to the patient. The fact is, the largest part of the world market is health, and if we could be the best producer of new medicine, new technology, and new solutions in health, we will create hundreds of thousands of high-paying jobs, and we will do it in a way that creates billions of dollars of foreign exchange. If you go to the University of Iowa, as I did recently, and talk to their advanced scientists, we're at the edge of a revolution in our ability to help people live longer, more independently, and more healthily. And if we do it right with the 21st Century Food and Drug Administration, that will create an enormous number of jobs. On energy, I have a very simple proposition. I'm for American energy. I'm for American energy, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's coal, whether it's nuclear, whether it's wind, whether it's solar, whether it's ethanol. I think the idea of the next $1 billion going to Iran or going to Iowa, it shouldn't be that hard to figure out. You'd rather have it go to Iowa. Or the next $1 billion going to Saudi Arabia or going to South Dakota. So I favor an across-the-board energy approach designed to make us independent of the Middle East, so we do not have to ever worry about the Iranians closing the Straits of Hormuz or the Saudis not being our friends. And I can promise all of you, you will never see me bow to a Saudi king or walk arm in arm with a Saudi king. I think that we need a policy that lets us stand erect and say to them, we actually are rather indifferent to them, and we're not going to tolerate them funding terrorists. And I think that we cannot do that effectively if we're relying on them. I give you this broad outline because I think that it's very important to understand how dangerous the world is right now. We are the engine which has, for most of the 20th century, driven the world economy. When we get weak and we get confused, the entire world economy gets weak. The European situation is very real and very dangerous. And we need to re-accelerate the American economy to create jobs and economic growth, or we run a very bad risk of another downward spiral being triggered by the collapse of Greece and Spain and Italy and Portugal. Now, this is a very dangerous time for the world economy. We also have to recognize that we have been very foolish on national energy. Cliff and I had lunch with Secretary of State George Shultz at the Reagan Library on President Reagan's 100th anniversary. And Secretary of State Shultz said, how many times do you have to get hit over the head by a 2x4 to realize that we need an American energy policy before there is a true crisis which drives the entire industrial world into a depression? And the dangers in the Middle East are very real. And so I think both as a matter of national economics and a matter of national security, we need a profoundly American energy policy, and that's part of what this campaign is about. I would love to have your help. I will just say two last things in closing, and then I want to take questions, that's all right with the clock. The first is I'm not going to ask any of you to be for me, because if you're for me, you'll vote and go home and say, I sure hope Newt gets it done. I don't believe it's possible for any one person, even the president, to get this country back on the right track. I think it takes a lot of us. And that's why I will ask you to be with me. I would ask you to stand side by side with Calista and me for the next 8 years, because we need to remind the Congress every day. We need to remind the governor, the state legislature, the city council, the county commission, the school board. We all have to move in the same direction. Furthermore, the fact is, if we undertake the scale of change, we need to get America back on the right track. We're going to make mistakes. It's not going to be perfect. And we need you to be networked together through social media to be able to say that's not quite working, or the world has changed, or here's a better idea. Finally, if we implement the 10th Amendment, if we shrink the bureaucracy in Washington, and we return power back home, we have to grow citizens. Because you have to fill the vacuum we've now created by taking the power away from the Washington bureaucrats. So I will ask you to be with me. I would love to have your help on the 3rd. I think this election this coming year is the most important election of our lifetime. I think 8 years of Obama will wreck the country. And I think that we have to win this election, which means we have to win the argument. As Lady Thatcher used to say when she was Prime Minister, first you win the argument, and then you win the vote, which is why, if you do make me your nominee, I will challenge the President to 7 3-hour Lincoln-Douglas-style debates with a timekeeper and no moderator. I will concede in advance that he can use a teleprompter if he wants. After all, if you had to defend Obamacare, wouldn't you want to have a teleprompter? I believe he will agree to the debates, and I can assure you that if I'm your nominee, in my acceptance speech in Tampa in August, if he is not yet accepted, I will announce as of that night that the White House will become my scheduler, and I will, wherever the President goes, I will be there 4 hours later to respond to his speech until he accepts the debates. And I think it won't take, in the age of talk radio and 24-hour television news, it won't take many weeks of that before he decides that debates are less painful. But I do think that this is a time we need a serious discussion. And that's why I started out with what is in a sense a history lesson. Supply-side economics has worked twice. It worked in the early 80s when Kemp and Reagan and others, with my help as a very junior member, implemented it. It worked in the 90s when we implemented it. It'll work again in 2013. It will work with startling speed. It will move the country. The minute people begin to believe Obama's going to lose, you will see the economy start to move. And on election night, if it is clear that a team committed to cutting taxes, cutting regulations, creating American energy, and rebuilding respect for people who create jobs is winning, I think you'll be surprised by the next morning how much new investment, how many new opportunities, how much new energy there is in the American system. So I'm very optimistic. We have done it before. We can get it done again. And I look forward to having your help to get it done. And I'll be glad now to take questions. That's right. And the first question is apparently right here. Hold on, he's going to bring you a microphone.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for coming to visit our club today. It's a pleasure to have you here, and Mrs. Gingrich as well. So, Mr. Speaker, you made a few references to Governor Romney in your talk today, and I have to say, I imagine you probably got a Christmas card from the Postmaster General this year because of all of the negative things I got in the mail with your name on, so you've been the impetus to stimulate the post office the past year. But anyway, that aside, all of these pieces of mail that I get say all these great, terrible things about Newt Gingrich. But you've stayed above the fray and not made negative comments, which is great. At the same time, elections are about contrasts. And I'm not asking you to go negative, but I'm wondering if you could draw some stark contrasts for us between yourself and between Governor Romney. Thank you.
Well, let me say, first of all, I've suggested, and I'll repeat this suggestion all over Iowa, the governor has been very cheerful about his PAC spending millions in negative ads, and he's been very cheerful about his staff being negative. I'd like to have one 90-minute debate with the governor and myself somewhere in Iowa before the caucus. He can bring all of his negative attacks, and let's just face to face. I mean, I have, all of you who watch the debates know I worked very hard in the debates to stop the news media from getting us to fight each other. I am a Reaganite. I believe in Reagan's 11th commandment. The only person these negative ads are helping is Barack Obama. Now, I don't mind people taking on my record, and I don't mind defending and explaining my record. When you've been around as long as I have, you have a record. But I also think, and again, I don't want to be invidious about Governor Romney, who, as I said, I think is a very competent manager and a very smart man. But to have somebody who was a Massachusetts moderate, who said he did not want to go back to the Reagan-Bush years, who voted as a Democrat for Paul Tsongas in '92, who campaigned to the left of Teddy Kennedy, who as recently as running for governor said, I'm really sort of a moderate, pragmatic guy. To have him run a commercial that questions my conservatism? I mean, I've been a conservative my entire life. I went to a Goldwater organizing meeting in Columbia, South Carolina in 1964. I worked with Ronald Reagan starting in 1974. As I said earlier, I work with Kemp and others to help develop supply-side economics. I have a 90% American Conservative Union lifetime rating. There's a point, I've got a 98.6% right to life rating. There's a point where you look at some of these ads and you wonder, Lincoln once said, if a man will not agree that 2 + 2 = 4, you'll never win the argument because facts make no difference. And I watch most of these negative ads and I think they never read Lincoln. So I try not to answer them. Well, the commercials we're about to put up are all positive. They all go straight at how do you create jobs and how do you get the right things done. But I do reserve the right, if I'm asked, to explain the differences. We've done a series of telephone town hall meetings. We'll do a series more. And I ask people to go to the telephone town hall meetings. You can ask any question based on any brochure, any robocall, or any TV ad you've seen, and I'll be glad to answer it. Okay.
Mr. Speaker,
Yes,
thank
sir.
you very much for coming. Appreciate it very much. Could you say maybe just a quick synopsis on your China policy? The Republican establishment for years said that if we do a lot of trade with China, as long as we get very active in their internal affairs, their economic policies, they will become friends or world citizens. They will in fact become good partners and things will get better rather than worse. Yet their human rights violations continue unabated. In fact, I would say worse than ever. So what would be your China policy with respect to trying to improve human conditions in a country that really does not allow a whole lot of freedom?
Well, I think it's a good question about China. I think a couple of things about the Chinese. First of all, the primary challenge for us remaining the dominant military power in the world is us, not China. If we adopt the right policy on science and technology, the right reforms of education, if we adopt the right tax and regulatory policy for manufacturing, they won't catch up to us in the next 100 years. We have to make a substantial investment in a better Navy and a better Air Force and better activity in space, in cyber warfare, and being able to defend ourselves against an electromagnetic pulse attack. But if we make those investments in a rational, calm, methodical way, they will remain decisively for the next 100 years less powerful than we are. And I will just tell you on behalf of our two grandchildren, Maggie was 12 and Robert was 10, I do not want them living in a world where the Chinese dictatorship is the dominant country. I mean, and I think it's very dangerous to let the U.S. decay to a point where the Chinese would be confused about a confrontation. So I am very much in favor of us doing what is needed, both domestically, which is the key. You cannot sustain national security if you don't have a strong economy. And we have been very fortunate since 1840. We've consistently been bigger than anybody else, and that's enabled us to have huge advantages when we ended up in conflict. Second, I think we should distinguish the Chinese people and the Chinese dictatorship. We should make every effort to be friends with the Chinese people. There are 4,000 Chinese students at the University of Iowa. I mean, the fact is we have a real interest in Chinese people understanding freedom, understanding the rule of law, understanding that our rights come from our Creator. But the Chinese dictatorship is exactly that. It's a Chinese dictatorship. Well, we as a country should have sort of a jaundiced attitude towards dictators. We don't have to go out and be hostile, but we also don't have to back off. I once had a great time debating Jiang Zemin when he was the head of China and I was Speaker of the House, and we had a great meeting. He by the way, had done his undergraduate work on Gone with the Wind, and was a student of American Studies when he was young. And so we were able to chat. We had just done the 3,000th anniversary of the founding of the city of Jerusalem, and we had a ceremony in the U.S. Capitol. And so I decided, because the Chinese like this game of saying, well, we represent this very ancient civilization, and I decided, yeah, and so do we. And so I started part of the conversation by saying to him, you know, we both represent very ancient civilizations. Of course, our government is much older than yours. And he just broke up. He knew exactly what I was doing to him. And I think we